Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of the Cutie Art Crusaders. This is episode 141 for March 24th, 2015. My name is Rainbow Plasma. I'm the organizer and host of this podcast, and today I'm joined by...
Burned1, the special guest coordinator of the podcast, and this week I'll be the editor.
I'm FlutterGuy317, and I'm the media manager for the podcast.
And I'm Atmospark. I do the questions and DeviantArt and stuff.
So, much like a special guest episode, which this is not, occasionally we have these kind of special episodes that we like to kind of go more in depth in art and try and help teach people a little bit more. But before we get into all of that, we do have a couple of talking points. So make sure to stick around. We're going to have a really exciting episode for you guys this week. But something that happened just this last week was Mr. Flutterguy's birthday, which we talked about in depth a little bit last week. Of course, happy birthday again. But now it's a week over, so at that point, nobody cares about your birthday anymore.
Wait, it was your birthday recently?
I guess so.
That's Joel.
It
was also St. Patrick's Day, which we didn't talk about at all. So
no, it was very green. No, I mean, I went out to dinner with my parents, and then I showed up in the stream, 15 minutes into the episode, and it was
Probably
really
20.
nice just hanging out with you guys and with the audience, and there was a lot of faces that we haven't seen in a while. I know Chris Musics hasn't been around for a couple months and stuff.
Yeah.
He was there, and then we went and we crashed on Burn's stream afterwards.
Yeah,
so it was a lot of fun.
I think there was a couple people in the chat asked me to stream. I think Dixie was the first.
Yeah.
And so they're like, Burn, you should stream. I'm like, all right. So I drew us super drunk on St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah.
I drew Neza Goring trying to steal my chips because she's a jerk. They're my chips.
It was true. She almost did. But I think the biggest thing was that Burn sent me a package, and it arrived 2 weeks ago, and on the front of it was a drawing of his face, and a big thing that said, "Do not open until your birthday."
Glad you like the drawing.
Yeah, it was a fantastic drawing.
I did that in the the mail place while people were looking at me. It's great.
And so I waited until this past Saturday to open it up, because Burn wanted me to open it up in a Skype call with him. And it was an absolutely adorably amazing plushie of Applejack.
Oh.
And thank you so much, because she's amazing, and you really shouldn't have, but it's so cute, and thanks.
You're welcome, man. I'm glad you like it.
Yeah.
throw up a picture of it on the screen. Stream? We're not streaming.
But do what?
I mean, technically, we're streaming
So, Burn,
in one universe.
I actually haven't asked you this, but who made this plushie?
So the plushie artist that I got the Applejack from was little-brony-peep on DeviantArt. So little brony peep.
Aw.
He's a very, very nice individual.
Yeah.
And really, really awesome plushie quality as well. So.
Yeah, definitely. She's really awesome, and she has a magnetic hat, so really cool. Thank you.
That's always then a really nice touch when anything's magnetic or removable, you know?
Yeah.
That was a selling point for me. It's the hat comes on and off. I gotta get this for him.
It's Applejack plushie, meh. Hat magnetic? Oh yeah.
I do have to admit it was really hard for me to to mail the plushie to you because I really wanted it. The plushie greed.
It is real.
Speaking of things you got this week, Burnt, you mentioned again. You did mention this on the last podcast, but you actually did get the shirt you were talking about last week, so that's cool.
Yeah, I got it in the mail. I was posting it on Facebook.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I liked your picture.
That's why I put that one in the talking points there, because I need to give him the opportunity to talk about it some more.
I'm telling everyone again, everyone watching this, the picture's there on the screen. It's of my face, and you see how good I look in that shirt. You too can own that shirt. All right, the link for it will be in the description of this YouTube video. We'll link it in the stream chat. I'm telling you,
we were not paid.
No. I need everyone as possible who can afford that shirt to buy that shirt and then wear it to BronyCon, and we're gonna have a meetup We're gonna have a Peponi.
Is Peponi going to
meetup?
Yes.
BronyCon? Oh,
Yeah, she's going to BronyCon.
that's right.
I've already gotten one. So this is the best part. I already have gotten one dude who's going to BronyCon to buy that shirt.
Yes.
I already have one more person who's going to own that shirt and wear it to BronyCon with me.
We were not
fabulous.
We were not endorsed by Paypony.
Or by Redbubble. But
The opinions and thoughts of a certain individual, Burned 01 on the podcast, does not represent the entire podcast.
But we are endorsed by somebody.
I mean,
well, supported by someone.
Yeah, that.
I mean, okay, wait, whoa, okay, this is, I'm going to take this one over, because this is not a topic. We're not endorsed or anything by anybody.
By Hasbro, we are.
So
No, we
we're
are
definitely not endorsed by Hasbro.
We're endorsed by burnedisthebest.corporation.
I mean, sure.
Sure.
I'll allow it.
Burn.horse.
So this last week, we received our very first donation. Most people probably don't know because it's not like we really advertise it, but we have a little donate thing under our Picardo page, to kind of have like upkeep for like DeviantArt account premium and like Picardo stuff like that. So
Yeah, it was something I set up I just have there. Like when we were setting up the first when we were setting Picardo up at first, I was like, it'd be nice to just have this, and I just threw it down there. We didn't say anything about it because we didn't expect anything to really come of it, but we totally got our first donation ever last week, and I'm super freaking pumped.
Yeah, so
I think it's amazing.
Guys, now we're professionals.
Yeah, so
right?
I just wanted to give a shout out to that guy. We won't mention the name because we don't know if it wants to be anonymous or not, of course. But someone donated money. You know who you are.
You're awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're gonna pump that into like premium membership or something like that. So yeah, thanks so much for doing that. That's really above and beyond what you really need to do. But we do appreciate it. And
exactly.
that's all I really want to talk about that on that front. And that's really everything that we have to talk about in the talking points. So, I mean, we made good time compared to last week.
Yeah, well,
last week we were just in the mood.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
I mean, we're in a different mood this week, but we are in a mood.
Well, we're in an educational, it's always funny. Bernd and I talk, and we have this back and forth where, because we're both very kind of strong personality, we both like to have directions for the show to go in, and I've always been the entertainment side, and Bernd's always been the education side. Not to say that we can't do both, of course, but it always seems to be the directions that we're both pulling in. The beautiful tug of war, the beautiful tug of war is what ends up as CAC at the end. But so last week I had my fun. And this week, Bernd gets to have his fun, because we have the educational episode this week.
When does Emma Spark get his fun?
Max.
Emma Spark never gets his fun.
Oh.
His fun is locked away in a cage, deep inside my heart.
You
got
got
a kitty.
On this show.
You got your fun when you got licked by a cow.
It's true.
Yeah, but it was like 100 episodes ago.
And that's the way we'll keep it.
Oh. So, Bernd, what are we learning today?
Hey! So on the stream, on Tuesday, I started talking about color theory, and people started calling me Professor Bernd. So we're going to stick with that.
Okay.
So this week, Professor Bernd is going to be talking about perspective. And so the concept of perspective. Because in our last episode, if those watching remember, if you've seen it, we got in this big argument about Davinian's piece, The Golden Cage, and like how the perspective worked in that. So we're going to try to tackle all the concepts of perspective and how it works in this episode. So
how we're
going to start. Oh, go ahead.
I will just remind you, we have let's say 45 minutes to do this. So
yeah, we're going to try to keep this quick. A quick definition of what perspective is it's the art of drawing and portraying the illusion of three-dimensionality on a 2D surface. So it's trying to realistically portray the concept of depth on basically paper, a computer monitor, or whatever thing that is flat, right? So like, how do you make something flat look like it's not flat, right? So that's basically what perspective is. And so there's a few basic points of how artists will try to tackle the art of creating the illusion of perspective. And we have this super cool thing set up where I can actually draw on this little thing that we're all a part of. So we have our names here down below. We all have our own little color. And so the first thing that you need to know about like how a basic perspective works is that every single piece of perspective has a horizon line, a vanishing point, and then lines that go to that. And then we're going to talk about that a little bit with some of the art pieces. So what I'm going to do to start is bring up our first art piece that's a great example of what is the first step to portraying perspective, and then we'll talk about it a little bit more.
Okay, so the very first piece that we have here is a piece by Smells Like Beer, and it's a piece called Forgotten. And this is where we see Twilight and Spike in the library, and it's very nice. So go ahead, Bernd.
Okay, so this is like the most simple and easiest way to see perspective and how it's working. So you have this very long hallway that they're both standing in, right? And you have all of these lines that are pointing back to a similar location. And so this is called one-point perspective. This is a great example of one-point perspective. And you can tell it's one-point perspective because it obviously all those lines that are going back towards a single point, 1 point, and then the horizontal lines, so the vertical lines are all straight. So if you notice, all the pillars are all straight. And then the horizontal lines as well. So like the tiles, those lines going back in the distance are all straight as well. But then there's angular lines, which are going back to basically those doors are like right above the doors, right? So that's 1 point perspective. And there's an awesome work in progress that Smells Like Beer did. And he basically shows you his basic layout of how he came to drawing all this in 1 point perspective. So you can actually see how he drew some of the perspective lines going back into the distance, and then, started building this awesome like landscape around it. And then he added his awesome like key to his style, cross-hatching, with like all the shading and line work. Smells Like Beer is a really awesome artist when it comes to cross-hatching and stuff like that. So now to explain the basic things of how this perspective work, or how any perspective works. So Smells Like Beer started with a horizon line. So you can see on my little screen here, I have this black line, which is the horizon line. And that's basically what your eye level is. So horizon line is basically how high up you are or how low you are. It's where the viewer is standing and looking. And how that works is basically like if you're standing here, right, so your head's at this level, and then you have your body here, you can't see anything above this line, and you can't see anything below this line, if that makes sense. So if you have an object here in the distance, you can't see on the roof of it, and you can't see below it. So that's why a horizon line is your eye level. It counts as your eye level, right? So that's how we perceive depth. And so this line here is the horizon line. And then in 1 point perspective, you have a vanishing point, and a vanishing point is where all of those diagonal lines come to meet, right? So that's just the point and where all the lines converge. And as we go on, we're going to start adding more horizon lines, or not horizon lines, adding more vanishing points, and we'll get to that. And then a fancy line for these diagonal lines that converge is orthogonal lines. And orthogonal lines just mean lines that will vanish back into the distance. It just the big word makes you sound smart, which is why I like to use it.
I remember we once got into a debate about orthogonal lines because they mean something completely different in art and math.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So you'll notice in Beer's piece, he has these horizontal lines that don't move, and then he has the lines that fade back. So I'm just going to draw a quick box here in 1 point perspective to show you how it works. So we can see the top of this box because it's below the horizon line. It's below our point of view, right? So we can see the sides of it like this, right? And then there'll be another line right here to create the side of this box. That's kind of how this works. And we can see the top of it. So this is just 1 point perspective where these diagonal lines will go back and meet it in the distance, but these horizontal lines are perfectly flat, and these lines on the side are perfectly flat. So this is just simple 1 point perspective, and Smells Like Beer's piece is an awesome example of that. I see, do I have another example? Yeah, so since some other quick examples are like in Blitz Pony's piece, if you'll only notice, she, again, uses this concept of 1 point perspective, but instead of being in the very center of the image, like in Smells Like Beer's piece, it's off to the side, and our eye level is way above the cityscape, so the horizon line of where we're looking is now placed way at the bottom of the city, right? So we have this character that's actually above our view, and all these cityscapes above our view where we can't see on any of the roofs. So this was just another really cool example, and I love Blitz Pony. I have to put her in there, so you know what I mean?
Of course, naturally.
Yeah,
now, Bernd, I have a question between these two pieces. In the first piece, in Forgotten by Smells Like Beer, Twilight and Spike, the characters, are placed below the horizon line, and they look very small, and the setting looks very cavernous. In the second one, the character's placed above the horizon line and is very large and kind of the main focus of the piece. is that something to do with perspective, or is that more with placement of the characters?
It's a little bit of both. So obviously the character in Blitzpony's piece is placed right in front of us, right? So it's close to us, so it's going to be bigger. And then in Smells Like Beer's piece, the characters are farther away. So these like lines going back to a vanishing point are not the only ways to show depth or show perspective. There's actually multiple ways to show depth and perspective. So the first that we're talking about here is like lines going to a vanishing point. The second is strategic placing of objects as they go back into the distance and then making them smaller. So obviously objects that get more farther away will get smaller, right? And then the third way to show depth is to place things in front of other things. So like if you have, go back to my screen here, if you have a circle and then behind that circle you have a box behind it, since the circle is in front of that box, we know that it is closer to us than the box is. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's another way to show perspective.
It's such a powerful concept that you just drew a circle in a box, and my brain separated them and said the box was behind the circle. Like,
yeah.
the cool thing about perspective is that it's so pervasive in our human brains that when we draw these kind of sketchy, simple examples right here, it's still very easily illustrated.
Well, and I guess that's kind of a good point, is that our brains are very good at pattern recognition, which is why perspective works in a 2D medium. Yeah. Because you've seen similar patterns before in nature. So seeing these these lines that are going to a vanishing point just looks 3D in your mind.
Yeah, of course.
So like this is what makes perspective so cool too, because it's all the attempt to represent three dimension or whatever, the third dimension. But even this concept, the 1 point perspective, it's technically flawed. Like it's technically not actually how we see things in reality. It's very close, and it's as close we can get, but there's still mistakes about it. So throughout the centuries since like art has been created, you know, in the Renaissance and all that, artists have been struggling with what is the best way to represent to just dimension, you know, represent the concept of perspective. So let's see. And speaking of that, that kind of brings me into this last 1 point perspective piece that I wanted to talk about, which is called The School of Canterlot. This is actually based off of an actual like historic Renaissance painting by Raphael called The School of Athens, which is in the Vatican, if I remember correctly. And I think it's kind of funny. It's a little spin on this like very famous concept with all these Greek and Roman, or just Greek philosophers, and in this epic painting, right? But this scene uses 1 point perspective, and the points all of this perspective point all lead back to the characters, like the main characters, so Celestia and Luna, right? Where in the School of Athens in the original piece, they lead to the main theologists. I believe it is the names I was looking for were Plato and Aristotle. So it's using a vanishing point to direct your focus, right? Because our eyes will see these very strong diagonal lines, and they'll lead us, because normally when they point to a certain area, you know, they can lead our eye or whatnot. But you can see all those lines in like the floor and around the characters. Anywho, I just wanted to throw this one in there because I thought it was really cute.
Yeah. So something that you'll notice throughout all these pieces is there's a lot of architecture. And I think that's just because that architecture with its straight lines kind of leads towards very easy representations of perspective.
Correct. Very correct. It's just because perspective works best when you have very long, straight lines, right? That are technically parallel. Because in real life, if you looked at this from the top-down view, all the diagonal lines we'd be seeing in the School of Canterlot piece, they're parallel with each other, right? They're even with each other. But in perspective, we don't see it like that because they get smaller as they go back, you know? So on that concept of that you usually see this in architecture, another way to show perspective that I did want to touch on really quick is aerial perspective. And that's basically, what do we call that? We call that atmospheric perspective. We've talked about it a lot on the show before. And so just to throw a quick, I guess, example of atmospheric perspective, let's jump to this piece right here, which is At Eternity's End by Assassin Monkey. This is an example of aerial perspective where it's not using that vanishing point, but it's now using the concept of the horizon line, which is way back there in the distance. And then it's also using that concept of where things get smaller as they go back into the distance. So you see these weird alien trees that Assassin Monkey has painted, and you can see as they go back into the distance, they get much smaller. But the other concept is as things go back into the distance, they get not only smaller, but much less detailed. And then they also get more desaturated because the atmosphere gets in the way, the air gets in the way, right? So traditionally, it's normally painted in a blue, but the atmosphere can be whatever color. So in this fantasy universe, atmosphere is pink, where at like a sunset or dawn, the atmosphere can be a red or yellow, when the sun is setting. But point is, it gets in the way and makes things kind of pale and misty, right? So you can see that in the background of this piece where the mountains get really like diluted. So that is another way to show vast amounts of perspective and depth, because we see that ever since we're like a little kid and we look off into the sunset or we look into the distance, we can see that and we tell like, oh wow, that's far. That would take me forever to walk.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Dear kids, don't actually look at a sunset. It might be very painful. The sunlight hurts your eyes. But I think it's one of those fascinating things about life where, you always take for granted, air is see-through. Right? But, technically it's not perfect, because as you look into the distance, into far distances, it adds up over time. And then the small amount of opacity, I suppose you could say, that's in the air leads to this kind of atmospheric perspective. And it's amazing how that kind of all adds together. And as you were mentioning, it's also affected by things like the lighting of the scene and or the lighting in real life, of course. If you're looking at a sunset, it's going to be the color of the sunset.
Is it possible, and I'm just kind of spitballing here, that this piece also uses a little bit of those converging lines just because of the way that the scene's kind of laid out?
If I may take this one, I don't know from a technical perspective whether or not it does, but I would like to caution against, I don't think that parallel lines necessarily indicate vanishing points either. You can have nice looking, there seems to be some semblance of parallel lines going on in this piece that seem to indicate certain directions, but I wouldn't necessarily say that those are vanishing points.
Yeah, so the tool that Assassin Monkey is utilizing in this piece is basically the height of the mountains. So assuming that these big peaks are about at the same elevation, as they go back into the distance, they're going to become lower, right? So the biggest point of a diagonal line that I can see is if you start at the very center where that river travels back into the distance by the horizon. If you look at the very base of that river and then you start tracing it to the tops of those mountains there, they create kind of a diagonal line up to the top right. So that's where you're seeing that, and Assassin Monkey is utilizing that, but it's not an actual use of like things going to a vanishing point, right?
Right.
Because that's where you are using things like in architecture where you have two lines that look as if they're going to converge at a certain point. Yeah. Where in this piece, Assassin Monkey is just utilizing that concept of height of this landscape to kind of travel back into the distance. Right.
I'm gonna add to that. Sorry, I've got a cat crawling all over me. If you do that same movement where you start at the very furthest away point on that river and go up towards the top right corner, don't stop at the mountain. Keep going up. That cloud is also on a diagonal. And if you go to the other side, make the same movement on the left, you'll see there's also a diagonal cloud there. So I believe he is using those orthogonal lines.
Right, but the concept, I believe, what Bernd is talking about is, for example, in the Forgotten piece, there's very explicit lines, like the architecture itself is bending towards the vanishing point as opposed to being arranged in the scene.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but this is just showing that it can be done without having those hard, harsh lines. Those orthogonal diagonal lines are still there, but they're much more subtle. Even if you're not directly looking at it, your eye can still see it.
So we get a little off track here, but basically what Atmospark was noticing is that there's some of the clouds in the top and left corners are actually diagonal and point back inwards towards the center of the picture. But he was getting a little confused because the diagonal lines or that those clouds are seeming to create aren't actually vanishing back to a direct vanishing point, because how orthogonal lines or diagonal lines that converge to a vanishing point work is they're parallel lines in space. So in reality, they're actual parallel lines that you would see traveling next to each other if you were like looking at them from the top down or something like that. And then they just appear to vanish at the same point because it's an illusion that they do. But something like clouds, something round like that, can't actually do that. But what we end up noticing is that Assassin Monkey actually meticulously lines up the mountains to kind of drift back and point back into the distance, which is more utilization of big objects get smaller as they go back rather than the orthogonal lines that we're talking about, where those are parallel lines in reality that vanish to a specific point along the horizon line. So careful with those definitions.
Right. Like in this piece, for example, if you take a look at a lot of the objects within the scene, they're not. I think it's a gray area in this piece.
Mm-hmm. It's obviously a gray area, and Assassin Monkey's doing and is using certain aspects of it. The biggest thing that Assassin Monkey's using is larger aspects get smaller as they go back. So like it's a very creative use of this concept of perspective, which is why I like this piece. So you have large mountains that get smaller and like large rocks that get smaller, and so on and so forth. And you are definitely right that there is this use of a diagonal line that travels back to what would be a vanishing point, but you can't say that that's the actual vanishing point for this piece because there is nothing else to give specific things directing it. He just has the mountains lined up. I don't know where I'm going with this, man. Where I should have been going with that is to actually create a vanishing point, or to have a vanishing point, you have to have these diagonal orthogonal lines that appear to be creating a point in which they converge. So these mountains and clouds, they can't actually create a vanishing point because they're not actually parallel objects in space or parallel lines in space. So that's why things like architecture work so well, because if we were to look at like a building or a box from the top down that creates a vanishing point, these two spaces are these two boxes or buildings are parallel. The sides of them are parallel with each other. But when you look at them in perspective, those buildings that we were just looking at appear to have their sides vanish at a point, right? So they appear to converge. So these two boxes that we were just looking at, if we're standing right here, they appear to create this this point in which they'll converge way off into the distance where the horizon line is, which is the same thing as our eye level. So in Assassin Monkey's piece, there is no vanishing point because there are no parallel objects that create diagonal lines that appear to vanish or converge at a specific point.
It makes sense. It makes sense. It makes sense to me, and I think there is a gray area, which is why it's kind of confusing. And I think, in these kind of situations, we can't really distinguish, and we can't really say that for sure something is or is not. Art is very subjective, and it's kind of loose. And he is kind of using the concept loosely, where the objects themselves seem to line up along a vanishing point, but the actual, there is no actual orthogonal lines going to it.
Yeah, thank you. That's correct. So this concept of perspective is a tool that artists will use to try to create this illusion of depth, right? So Assassin Monkey has used it in a very creative way with the concept of that diagonal lines in the mountains to try to show that vastness and that depth. And it's worked very well. And this is a very general rule, and it's a general tool and strategy that artists can use. And so you can obviously bend it and do it in different ways, and you become more advanced with it. So that leads us to our next concept, because one-point perspective is technically very flawed, and if you want to show things at angles or things turned on their side, one-point perspective can only show something you're looking directly in front of, but it still would be a little bit skewed. So that pushes us into our next talking point, which is two-point perspective, which is the next step up.
Right. So two-point perspective is a really interesting concept to me personally, because I actually have a little bit of experience with two-point perspective. Throughout my schooling years, I took a couple of art classes, and one of the things that was quite frequent is that I'd have to draw something using two-point perspective, which is where my knowledge of things like horizon lines and vanishing points comes from. So, for example, in this piece here that Bern's going to put on the screen, it's called Ponyville Hospital by Consumo. You can see that the concept of a vanishing point is present throughout both pieces. You can notice, if you just take a look at the piece one half at a time there, on the right half you can see that these lines are all aligning and getting smaller as they go towards one singular point on the right hand side, which seems to be a little bit off the page. But you can also notice on the left hand side that the other side of that large house is their lines are also kind of converging together towards another vanishing point that is again off the page. And so you can kind of combine these two vanishing points to give this kind of outward perspective, this outward facing house perspective.
Mm-hmm. It's awesome. And so why this is cool as well is we're going to hop back to my screen. So let's say this is the edges of the piece, right? And then you have this house that's in the middle here. We'll make this the middle of the house, and we'll turn the house into a box. The vanishing points aren't placed within where we can see, like in some of the 1-point perspective pieces. It's totally possible to place a vanishing point off the screen in 1-point perspective, and we'll see that later. But in this 2-point perspective, the vanishing points are placed off here to the side. So when you draw this line that connects them, the top and bottom of this house, you have these horizontal lines that will make this box. So now here you have this box that is in perspective. And obviously, we can draw at the back of the box is, we'll say it's like here or something, or whatever, what have you, the house. But you have it traveling back and back off the screen to these two vanishing points. Now, why this is really cool is this is both above and below our point of view, our sight, right? So how tall we are, where our horizon line is. So this is that horizon line. We can't see the roof of this building. We can't obviously see underneath of the building. So we can see both portions of it. To where if there was, let's say, a box way over here, we'll place it like this. We'll have a vanishing point that goes to this box, and then so the edge would be here, and wow, like this. Now we can see the roof of this box, right? Because it's below our horizon line. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so when you use those two in combination, it's almost like you're manipulating an object in space. You can use them as a tool in order to guide yourself. Because, imagine sitting down at a blank screen. Bern, do you mind erasing the blue thing, or just like getting rid of them for a second?
I can, whoop, whoop,
yeah. So like, imagine you're at a blank screen here, like, and you're just trying to like, how does make box, like, does perspective, like, where is this perspective going?
Yeah.
Like, what is that? Like, what is this? What is this? Like, it's not really easy to do, especially if you're not, experienced with this, or if you haven't used perspective before. So what the vanishing points can do, you can bring it back down if you'd like, Burned, or whatever.
That's fine.
What the vanishing points do is they kind of help you do that, because as you saw with Burned, you can place these vanishing points, and then look at how easily you can just make like a box. Like, you just do something like this, and then like this, and I'm using a mouse, and I still made a box that looks pretty good when I erase the other lines, like, it's got perspective to it. So,
hey.
I mean, I'm awful at drawing, and that should be said first and foremost, but you can use them as guidelines, and it's a really neat way to kind of ease your way into perspective. And then also, saying that as well, I don't want to make this come off as a beginner's technique. It's advanced, it's beginners, it's everything. It's you can't classify art techniques as beginner or advanced. It's just it's something that has been figured out over the years. That's really cool.
Yeah. And again, this is a general rule. So like, where you place these vanishing points off to the side is a bit up to you, and there's a lot of advanced concepts if you really want to do some research that we won't get into, where, like, let's say this is way in the distance and you have buildings way far away, and you have a huge building over here that travels to this vanishing point over here and over here. And so this is a big building. If you have another really big building that's like way closer and up in your face, it might travel to a different vanishing point. And so like these vanishing points of the building can actually change depending on your horizon line. So sometimes they may not always go to the exact same point, but that becomes very advanced at that point, and you have to really know where you're talking about. But in most cases, when you're just doing general like 1 to 2 to 3 point perspective, having singular lines that things will travel to from one viewpoint is just like it's a golden tool that it really is. It's really hard to mess up because when we see it, we instantly relate it with reality, and that concept of perspective and something placed in space. It also should be noted where you place those vanishing points all along the horizon line, how far away they are or how close they are, really depend on how close up you are to the object, what view you have to the object, what angle the object is at to your eye, and how much you want to exaggerate the feeling of depth as well. So all those factors come into play when you're like, where along the horizon line should I place these points where the lines converge? You have to think about, well, does this make sense when I'm really up close to it? Or does this make more sense if I'm really far away from it? Or how vast do I really want to make this thing seem? And so on and so forth.
And it's a very good tool to use, obviously not just for this, but it's a very good tool to use when you're talking about architecture and buildings, because usually architecture has some semblance of simplicity to it. Even if it looks very advanced, we saw that piece from last week with Divinian, that it was quite an ornate room, but it has simple concepts to it. It's still a box, right? So it's still got its edges. There is going to be some other pieces that we see where things like, the carpet or the tiles on the floor or things like that, they all kind of help you because they're straight lines. And so these kind of tools can be made quite simple with architecture.
Yeah, exactly. So that brings us into our next talking point. We'll get to Divinian's piece in just a second, but that brings us to our next step, which is 3-point perspective. So 2-point perspective, where you have a vanishing point on the left and vanishing point on the right, and where things travel to that, they're still a little bit flawed because let's say we have a box that's up above us. We're standing right at the bottom of this big box, so there's a vanishing point on either side, and we're like looking up at this great tall building, right? So like we're down here at the bottom. This is us, and we're looking way up at this tall building. These lines, these vertical lines, in 1 and 2-point perspective, these vertical lines are always vertical, just straight vertical, and 90-degree angles from the horizon line. But in reality, it doesn't work like that. When we're up close on something and looking up to it, these lines will actually get smaller and travel together, and to make this thing look really, really tall, right? Yep. So that brings us into 3-point perspective. So a piece I have for that, which is a pretty good example, is called Canterlot Halls by Josh5410. And you can see in this piece by Josh that looks like it's using that first point of perspective, right? That goes way back into the hall. So it's technically this is 2-point perspectives. There's 2 vanishing points, but you can see it's nice because it's using the vertical one that I want to talk about. So there's 1 point of perspective going to the door where the things are all going into it. But that third or second, in this case, point of perspective is also vertical. There's a vanishing point way up off the top of the screen where we can't see. So if you look at the pillars off to the left and right, you'll notice that they're not horizontal with the side of the picture plane, right? Because it's a square composition, so the side of the picture plane would be completely vertical. But you see those 2 pillars on the right and left hand side are tilted inwards, and they're actually pointing way up above the piece. And as the pillars travel backwards, they get closer and closer to perfectly straight. So this is an example of having a vertical vanishing point way off to the top. This is technically 2-point perspective, but it's a very easy to see that vertical vanishing point away at the top. So now this will bring us full circle all the way back into Divinian's The Golden Cage. So we talked about this last week, and we got in a bit of an argument about it, and I have some pictures that I put on the screen there, but I'm going to draw some on the screen, hopefully, for you guys here. So in this piece, you have obviously Divinian's crazy amount of detail and Celestia placed in this room, and I was talking about how there's a vanishing point leading to Celestia's chest, and then there's a vanishing point off to the far left, and then there's also, and what I didn't notice before is there's also a vanishing point up above that you can see as well, that leads way up above the point of perspective, which is the third point of perspective. So it's actually 3 planes of perspective going on here, which is pretty crazy.
For the record,
so I'm going to attempt.
If I may point it out, just to save a little bit of face, no pun intended, you did mention that the vanishing point was on Celestia's face, and when we looked at it later, it was actually on her chest.
When I put it into Photoshop and like actually laid it out, it was like right on her chest area. So I'm going to try to draw this on the screen really quickly. I don't want to take too long, but how Davinian's thing is set up, this is really laggy, so my pen's kind of going all over the place, but it's kind of set up like this. So this is the fireplace that's kind of over here, and then you have these lines going back towards Celestia, who's right here, and then these lines of the room that go like this, and then the lines of the floor that go like this, and then you have the floor line like so, and then this floor line. So everything's kind of traveling in this way. It looks kind of wonky, but point being, these lines where the fireplace are and the lines around like Twilight's little princess picture, and then the lines of the door and then the corner of the room where it's most prominent are all traveling upwards at angles, going up off the screen, which is that third point of perspective. And then you have the point where it is Celestia, where these where the lines of the room and ceiling are leading to, and then you also have the line that goes past the fireplace there that make the very corner of the room, which is right about here. And then also the floor follows that that point as well, which goes underneath Celestia right here. So yeah, so Raymond Plasma was pointing out 1.1, 2, and 3 for me. Thank you very much. And so it's created this awesome kind of epic space that is created this interesting way of portraying depth, I guess. And it's actually very curious to me because this point right here that is Celestia, this is like the hallway like leads down there, right? And like the corners and edges and ceilings of the room and stuff. And then the back wall that we see is also diminishing, but it's going off to a vanishing point way to the left. And then the things vertical are going back into the way in the point, or up in the ceiling. But anyway, this is how this piece is laid out, you know, the mechanics of it. And I don't know, it was interesting, and it was hard to see in the first piece until he actually like laid it out, you know?
Well, so now, I think in addition, I think it's fair to say that this use of vanishing points is very advanced, and it's very... it's very non-obvious. You know, when we looked at these other pieces, especially the 1 and 2 point perspective ones that we brought up first, like, I think it's fairly obvious to most people looking at it that there is these kind of vanishing points, and you can see these lines curve towards each other and bend and almost meet, you know? Whereas in a piece like this, 2 of the vanishing points are fairly far off the page. The one that's off to the left and the one that's above are fairly far off the page, and so it doesn't lead to very easy assessment of the vanishing points. In addition, the one that I labeled number 1, the vanishing point that is on the page, that is on Celestia, is in a way hidden by the fact that Celestia is right there, because she takes your focus off of the other lines that are pointing towards her. Very similar to how when you go take a look at the School of Canterlot High one that you were mentioning, the one that was based on the Greek philosophers, as it goes towards the back, it's kind of, the vanishing point is almost blocked by the characters that are in front of it. And so a similar kind of concept, I believe, happens in this one as well. But it's important to note that just because that might be happening doesn't mean that there isn't vanishing points.
It's interesting because you brought up a good point that when the horizon line is blocked by either a character or by other points in the setting, it is a lot more difficult to kind of see where the perspective lines kind of meet. And I guess it kind of distracts you a little bit from the fact that the artist is using these kind of techniques. And I guess it makes the scene a little bit more natural because you don't notice that. So now, Bernd, I had a question with this third point, or like the vertical point of perspective. Does that denote basically the vertical position of the camera or the viewing angle, and also like, well, the angle of the shot from vertical?
It's definitely the angle. So we're standing at a place that's about eye level with Celestia, right? So that's kind of where the horizon line is placed, where it's about her shoulder line. So that vertical vanishing point is determined at how radical of an angle are you looking at the wall, if that makes sense. So the wall is technically traveling upwards, farther away from us, so it's technically diminishing in perspective. But normally with a vertical thing, if I'm not like hugging or up at my chest up against the wall and looking up at something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not going to be a very, very radical vanishing point. We won't be able to see the vanishing point because we won't be looking, like actually looking up at it, you know? We're usually looking off into the distance, where in this example, where we're looking into the distance, but there's still the ceiling that's above the horizon or above the horizon line is greater than the area below it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think an easy way, if I may, to kind of describe it to the viewers, the difference between the height and the horizon line and the angle or the vanishing point and the perspective there, because before we get too far away from it, is that you know, if you imagine just, you know, if you're available to stand up and just stand at your desk, or if you're on the bus or whatever, just stand up. Maybe don't if you're on the bus, you might look weird. But you know, keep your head looking straight forward. You've got your horizon line, which is lined up with your eyes, and then, you know, bend at the knees. So, you know, you're but still look kind of like forward, and that's the kind of horizon line moving up and down. And then if you were to tilt your head up and down, that's kind of the angle that we're talking about. So in this piece, you know, our head as the viewer of the art piece is about level with Celestia's shoulder, but we are tilted up slightly, and that is what causes that kind of angle in the vertical lines heading upwards.
Yeah, and you can think about it as our view, or you can think about it as where the camera is taking the picture, or whatever.
That's
you
true.
know, where this camera is placed.
Especially,
so
like,
I want to keep moving. Or go ahead.
Especially like because I'm thinking in terms of like 3D modeling and stuff.
Yeah,
because that's, you know, that's a very good kind of reference for these perspective things. And I know, like, who is it? I Am Not, I think, did or was it?
Yeah, for our crab episode, he did a 3D render of a space
to see, because those 3D modeling programs have like algorithms to kind of calculate out perspective. So
yeah, they have X, Y, and Z already built into how they function. Yep. Where it's like it's easy to draw X and Y, you know, left and right, but then how the heck do you show Z?
Yeah.
You know, what the heck is Z?
Yeah. And that's what this entire episode's about, isn't it? You know, showing that Z axis. Yeah.
So that'll bring us. I do want to keep moving because there's a few really cool points about perspective that I want to talk about. So I want to draw a 3-point again real quick. So that's where you have, in a simple form, not in Davinian's advanced form, it's where you have vanishing point on the left, vanishing point on the right, and then a vanishing point somewhere way up above. And then when you draw that box that we had showed before, we'll just keep it flush with the ground. When you draw that box, now when you draw the corners of the box, they travel upwards to some point in space that we can't see, because we're up here looking at this this building, right? We're looking up at the building. So as the building goes up and more floors are added on, it keeps traveling back into the distance, right? So it gets taller and taller. So the building's actually diminishing in perspective as it goes up. So that's that point of 3-point perspective. So it leads us into our next point, which is called 4-point perspective. So which is basically like 3-point, but now you add on a point down here below, way down here off the bottom of the screen. So now as these, let's say we're standing on a balcony or something. So like this is a balcony, and we've got like a little railing here or something, so we don't fall off and fall hundreds of feet down
Safety
because we're on
first,
Empire
kids.
State Building or something. So like let's say this is the Eiffel Tower. There's it will actually travel back down if this is a square building, you know. So let's say we're at the top of a big office building. Obviously this is very skewed. The vanishing points would be way farther off screen and stuff, but this is a simple way to show it. There's a 4th vanishing point way down here at the bottom. So now if we're here and we're like there's a dude bending over the railing. Don't do this, kids. He's like, that's a horrible person. He's a very lanky body. There we go. Bending off the railing, looking down. If this is traveling downwards, then these are still like following these concepts of these two vanishing points off to the side, right? So 4-point perspective introduces not only a vertical vanishing point up above, but also a vertical vanishing point way down below, where something will diminish as it goes down. And so it's just another way of adding the illusion of depth to something down below. So like if you ever would need to show something like that, where this is your eye point and there's like some great big spire in the background, and then you have a lake or like something, right? And then the spire is reflecting in the lake, it would use that 4th point of perspective, where this spire follows these vanishing points, right?
That's a great example with the reflection, because I think that is something, I think it's very rare that you get something so massive and from such a perspective that you might see 4 vanishing points with one object just with your eyes. But that was a great point about the fact that the reflection can kind of give that a reason for having that fourth vanishing point.
Yeah. So that's just the introduction of 4th vanishing point. Reflections can do that, and then in very few cases they can create that in other ways. In historical context, there's been some other things. Thank you for the completion of the picture.
Yes.
Okay. So now this brings us into probably the 2 most advanced portions of perspective, but again, they're things that artists for centuries have been struggling with for the concepts in perspective. So this brings us into our next point of perspective, which is called photo perspective. And so the piece I have for that is called The Wrong Crowd for a Celebration by Harwick's Art. So now,
before we start,
yes, go ahead.
You might recognize this from our Spike episode, or our April Fool's No Spike episode.
Spoilers if they haven't seen it. Jeez.
Sorry.
Yeah. What photo perspective is it's the concept again with these concepts of vanishing points and things travel into the distance, but horizontal objects and all the other example like horizontal things in space will be like a flat line. So in this point, in this picture in Harwick's art, it's 1-point perspective. So you have these diagonal lines that travel back into the distance, but horizontal lines in normal 1-point perspective are all horizontal. But in photo perspective, you're taking the picture with a lens, a photo lens, and a photo lens is round. So now these horizontal lines are actually bent by the aperture of the lens, and they'll actually look as if to be like rounding, if that makes sense, as they travel above and below the thing. So if you look where it's most clear is in the top rafter of this picture by Harwick's art, you notice that it's bent. Now I totally see that just that rafter happens to be bent, and there's a bunch of other lines that are vertical, like the rafters behind it. But this was the closest thing I could find for an example of photo perspective. That's in pony art. But in actual photo perspective, things do bend to the aperture of lens, and that's just a folly of some perspective in photography. So,
by the way,
yeah, go ahead.
That is called barrel distortion, if you're thinking as a photographer. And the opposite is pincushion distortion, which is where everything bends basically the opposite direction.
Yeah. So this is with looking at the top pillar only is a great example of that photo perspective where something will bend for the aperture lens. So thank you. So that moves us into our last point, pincushion perspective or whatever, or distortion as you called it, or perceptive perspective. So perceptive perspective is the closest way that we would see in reality, and how we would perceive things in perspective. And it's basically how it works is things that are closer to us, or is it farther away from us? I believe things that are farther away from us, it's harder to see perspective, or vice versa. I don't know. This is the most complicated one by far. But the piece I have for this is called Lullaby in the Plaza by Lionheart Cartoons. And this piece is done by the animation duo Lionheart and Spirito. And now this isn't like a down to the T like follows the exact points of perspective with vanishing points. But the cool part about it that I wanted to show is if you look at the tops of the roof, they obviously diminish and get smaller as they go back into the background of this plaza, but they are rounded. So if you look at the tops of the roof, it actually bends and they're round as they diminish back towards a vanishing point on the horizon line. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So the horizon line's at a little bit of an angle, and you can see the plaza is kind of rounded, so the floor, but those roofs are also rounded as they go back. So if I draw that on my screen, let's say that vanishing point is to the little bit left of Luna, so Luna's over here. The tops of the roof diminish like this as they go back into the background, and so that's that opposite distortion that Flutter Guy was talking about, pincushion distortion, as you called it. Yep. So that's pretty cool. I didn't know that. So then you have these roofs or these buildings that kind of travel into the background like this, right?
Yeah. Well, you can also get some of the vertical lines distorting too, kind of towards the edge. Sometimes, I guess.
Yeah.
Pony. Nice.
And there's a vanishing point over here where these kind of buildings are warping like this.
Yeah.
So now you have this warping of distortion or whatever thing. So like, I'm just gonna finish this box. Where you could totally use other vanishing points or not. Oh my gosh, that's way too complicated. But
18 vanishing points.
This box being drawn here, you can
see the way it kind of warps
edges
in and out.
and whatever are now warping.
Yeah.
And so that's called perceptive perspective. And this is the closest way that our brain would interpret something, but just not this radical. This is obviously exaggerated just to show the point. But our brain, when we're looking at things, it would technically slightly warp it back like this, if that makes sense.
Is the perspective in this piece by Lionheart also kind of exaggerated?
Yes, very much so. It's exaggerated as Spirito kind of told us about a little bit in the interview that we did with her for the Children of the Night Part 2. But I guess in Part 1 as well. But the clouds and the buildings are all made to frame the character and point you towards the character. So the buildings and the clouds are all like pointing and leading and bending in towards Luna, right? To like direct your focus. Like when you look at the piece and your eyes snap to it, if you try looking out towards the buildings and stuff, they all start bending and pointing back towards Luna. Even the little points of the clouds and wisps of the edges of the clouds go like, hey, look over there, look at Luna, right?
Yeah.
So it's used very artistically to direct your vision and very beautifully as well. But this was the closest, if not the only example I could find where the perspective was kind of bent in towards a certain vanishing point.
And if you want to also take a moment to understand that this picture is a screenshot or a still image of a fully animated piece. And I wanted to take a moment to just say, like, in the description, Lion, he says, building a character in perspective using flash symbols is one thing, animating it all is another. And I think that I'd like to extend that to saying, doing still image perspective is one thing, trying to animate it is another. So, when you go back and watch Children of the Night, obviously it's very well made, but when you learn certain things like this, that's where you really go like, wow, right? Like that's a huge wow factor when you understand the complexity that has to go into the fact that they're using one of the most complex forms of perspective here, and then they're manipulating it in a 3D world. And this isn't models here, folks. They didn't create 3D models of ponies and 3D models of the town. It's all using these concepts that we taught here today, just in a much more advanced form.
Yep.
I was thinking recently while we were on the topic of Children of the Night, I was thinking recently, so I'm away from Ottawa where I normally live, but when I move back to Ottawa in September, I actually live about 10 minutes away from them. They recently moved to Ottawa, and I've been chatting with them back and forth, and I should do some sort of fun like series with them or video series, hop over to their place and film some stuff, because they're wonderful teachers and they love talking about this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. So
incidentally, our Children of the Night episodes are our most viewed ones.
Yeah.
It's true.
Go check them out. Definitely.
To recap on that, perspective needs like 3 basic things. You need this thing, which is called the horizon line. So I'm just going to write that there. So that's the horizon line. And then you need a vanishing point, which is this guy, which is where everything travels to. So that's the vanishing point. And then you need lines that travel back to that vanishing point, right? So, and those are, you just call them diagonal lines or lines that vanish, or orthogonal lines is the fancy word. But another thing that I did want to mention really quick is that as you have something, so like this is a box, right? We'll just make it a horizontal, thin little box. Oops. Like this, that travels back into the distance as it gets shorter. And so this distance from here is greater than this distance here. That's called foreshortening. I've now foreshortened this box, meaning that I've made it smaller as it goes back to show that it travels back into the distance, right? So it's foreshortening. I wanted to mention that really quick. But like all basic forms of perspective follow this concept where things vanish or grow smaller as they go back into the distance, and these concepts of vanishing points and 1 to 2 point perspective all just utilize this basic form of perspective, right? And so like it's very easy to use this in your own art for advanced concepts, and you can use tools like this to even help you lay out characters and how you look at them. And like you could even make this a top-down view, which some people do, which is very cool. So like if this is a street and we're a bird, and so that you have all these buildings that are now placed in this perspective horizon, right? Where now these are great tall buildings, and we can see on the tops of these buildings and like and stuff like that. So, you know, building, and there's like cars over here. So yeah.
Bernd, I know, just really quickly before we wrapped up, before we started this, you were talking about something where sometimes things will block the horizon line. So,
oh yeah,
yeah.
That's the concept of this. Let me move this off. Thank you, Rain Plasma, for that. We'll go. So this is called the horizon line, but it's also called the true horizon line. So the true horizon line is the line in which our view is set, right? It's the line in which the camera is placed or how high something is placed. What's called the visible horizon line is, let's say you have some mountains that are over here that are in the way of where the view you're at. The visible horizon line, where if like we have a sun over here, something is up here where these clouds are, but the true horizon line is where we're looking. So like that piece in an Assassin Monkey's example, the true horizon line was back in the background there where like the river travels back to, right? So yeah, thank you. So you have a road that's going off into the distance, and things are growing smaller as they get in, but you know, you have a horizon line with mountains up above. So that's the visible horizon line. Let's see. I'm gonna throw this off here really quick. So it's hard to think of an example of a true horizon line or visible horizon line where it's down below, but it's usually like if the sky ends here. So let's say, yeah, so this is the horizon of the sky, and we're up on the top of a hill, and the horizon line of vanishing point is up here, and then you have these really big, tall buildings that meet the ground at this angle. Oops. So we'll go like this. So this is a big, tall building, right?
Like,
so
you wouldn't actually be able to, because that's the actual horizon line.
Yeah.
This line couldn't go past here. Like, it would need to be cut off like here, right? But you can see that the angle doesn't angle towards a vanishing point on the horizon line. It points to a vanishing point that is like up here. That's where the difference between the true horizon comes into place, because this black line is the horizon line. But what you're saying is
the true horizon
right?
line.
So the black line is the true horizon line, or the horizon line that's used for the perspective, and then we've got this other one here, which is a bit confusing because that's like the Earth's horizon there.
It's basically like if we're standing, so like there's these other really big buildings over here, right? So like this is a big building and we're standing on top of this really big building. So this is like some big old balcony that we're standing on top of, right? If we're standing on top of this balcony, looking out at the sunset, we're technically way up above ground level, but our eye level is even with this building. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the visible horizon line where the sunset is, or horizon, just in the distance, basically the visible horizon line that we would think is where vanishing points would go to, because it's tricking us, is different from the true horizon line, which is what our eye level is at.
Right,
Another-
exactly. Again,
another
the
good
true
example-
horizon line is the eye level. That's a great point.
Yeah. Another good example would be if you're on a plane and you're above the clouds and you look out and the clouds are below you, so they kind of form like the visible horizon line, but you're looking above the clouds, so that's your true horizon line.
All right, I'm gonna have to cut this off because we are going too long here. But I think
but it's so educational.
I think we've hit on all the good points here today. I'd like to take this opportunity before we start doing the plugs to say thank you to Bernd for putting this all together. It came out really well. It came out really awesomely. I think we really demonstrated some great concepts here today, and so I think everybody should give a hearty thanks to Bernd for putting this all together, because it's not an easy thing to do for an hour. So, thank you.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, Bernd.
Thanks, Bernd. I'll draw you a love heart. Okay, so we have, in descending order of importance, we have Picardo, which is Google. Find that. That's where you can find our stream. We also have DeviantArt, which is cuteartcrusaders.deviantart.com. We have an email address, which is cuteartcrusaders@gmail.com. Send in questions and love notes and all sorts of things. We also have, what do we have? YouTube. youtube.com/cuteartcrusaders. We have the social media, which is Facebook, with Cutie Art Crusaders on Facebook. We have the Twitter, which is @CutieArtCrusade. We have Tumblr, which is cuteartcrusaders.tumblr.com. And is that it? Did I cover everything?
Yep, that's it.
Yep.
Yeah.
That is everything.
Did it? I got it right.
Yeah, we're still unbalanced on the plug page. We got 4 on the top, 3 on the bottom. We need to get another social media site.
We'll figure something out. We'll figure something out. We've got some stuff.
I keep saying Match.com.
So, couple things before we go here, because this is the end of the episode, so we're not going to have questions this week. So first of all, Bernd, you're heading off to BabsCon in about 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, 2 weeks. So we'll get to talk about it again next Friday, but BabsCon is April 3rd to April 5th, I believe, yeah. So April 3rd to April 5th. I'm going to be flying down to San Francisco to hang out with some friends and go to BabsCon and stuff and meet Citizen Smiley. I know you're in the chat, man.
So yeah,
or meet up with him there.
Dude, that guy's a boss. He
right?
He basically will say hi to everyone in the stream and yeah.
Really
cool.
So yeah, if you're heading down to BabsCon, hit us up on Twitter or hit Bernd up on Twitter so you can go and meet up with him there. In addition, the last thing that I wanted to mention really quick here today was that we used a program to draw kind of the stuff on the screen there for you guys, and I unfortunately have the duty of saying that I cannot relinquish that info because it is not made by us, and the person who has made it does not wish for it to become public domain. So we're very sorry about that, but unfortunately this is not something that is public, and it's something that the person requests to be private.
I just wasn't going to say anything.
Yeah,
I wasn't going to say anything either.
No, I know there's going to be questions, so that'll answer those questions. That'll stop those questions right now. So yeah. Anyways, that is everything for this week, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. We haven't had something quite like this since we had Spirito on the last time. And I don't remember, what was that episode again? That was
Color Theory.
Color Theory. That's right. Yeah. That's right. So add this one to the list of the educational podcasts. I think it went really well. I'm quite impressed with it. So
yeah. As far as next week, we go back to our usual, not really knowing what we're doing.
Yep. It's true. It's true. So yeah, I'll look forward to a normal episode next week. Nothing special planned there.
But that being said, if anyone has any concepts that they would like Burn to teach them, please feel free to suggest them, and we might schedule a future episode.
I think Bernd has basically like sat back in his chair and slumped down and just been like, "Whoo, we're done here." Speaking of we're done here,
time to get a cider.
Don't interrupt me. No one interrupt me. You've done it like 4 times. I'm done with it. We're ending the episode. That is everything. Thank you guys for watching, whether or not you're on Picarto or YouTube. We love you all the same. My name is Rainbow Plasma.
My name's Rindle1.
I'm Flutterguy317.
I'm at the Spark.
And we'll see you guys next week.
Bye!
Later, guys.
Bye.